The wind had gone still that evening, as if the world was holding its breath. Elias Boone sat alone by the stove boots, unbuckled hat, tossed near the fire, a small tin cup resting in his palm. The storm had passed, but left behind a silence too thick to trust, like the kind that comes after a scream, not before one. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, its pendulum beating like a tired heart. Outside, the snow stacked up past the porch rail, soft and high, erasing every footprint like the land had never been walked on. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 days, not since he'd heard the gossip down at Nolan's feed store. Boone's gone mad, they'd said. Still talks to his wife like she's sitting right there. He hadn't denied it, mostly because it was true. Then came the knock, not loud, not urgent, just steady. A soft tap on the side door, the one no one used since the fire. He didn't move at first. Thought maybe the wind had jostled something loose. But it came again. A knock, knock. Then silence. Then a third, slower, as if whoever stood there wasn't sure they had the right to ask. Elias rose, every joint protesting the motion. He opened the door, and there they stood. 5 of them, children more shadow than shape, wrapped in rags and too many silences. One girl, maybe 10, met his eyes. Her hair was crusted with frost. A baby was strapped to a woman's chest, her face gaunt, unblinking. The girl took a breath and asked, as if rehearsing words she'd never dared speak aloud, "Mister, do you have anything you don't need no more?" Elias Boone didn't answer. He just stepped aside, the door still open behind him, and said, "The barn's warmer than the wind. You best hurry." The barn hadn't held livestock in 5 winters. The hinges screamed when they opened, and the hay smelled more of dust than grain. But it was dry, and the wind didn't howl so loud between the beams. That was enough for now. Elias fetched a wool blanket from the trunk near the porch. It still smelled faintly of pine, and smoke memories folded into its threads. He didn't offer it to the woman. He laid it near the pile of burlap sacks and stepped back without a word. She didn't thank him. She only unwrapped the baby with hands that moved like they'd done it in the dark, while running, while scared, while bleeding. The children huddled close. The girl who'd spoken he'd learned her name was Ray, tugged at a boy's sleeve to help him sit upright. Elias lingered a moment at the threshold, and then turned and left, shutting the barn door behind him, like a man closing the lid on something too fragile to name. The next morning, snow glazed the world in silver. Elias chopped wood before dawn, and the axe swinging steady as his breath in the cold air. He didn't think about the children, or the woman, or why he hadn't told them to move along. But as he passed the barn with the armful of kindling, he paused. Inside, through a crack in the boards, he saw the girl Ray, brushing straw from the little boy's hair. She was talking to him in whispers. The boy didn't answer. He just stared ahead, eyes blank like the surface of a frozen pond. Elias turned away, jaw clenched, and marched to the porch. 9 years ago, a lantern fell in the hay. His wife Mary had gone out to calm the horses during a thunderstorm. Elias. The barn caught fast. The horses screamed. Mary never came out. Neither did their daughter Annie, who'd followed her in barefoot and holding the same comb she always used on the mare's tail. They buried Ash. That was all that was left. After that, Elias had boarded up the nursery, sold the herd, and quit speaking to God. The town quit speaking to him too. People don't like being near grief that lingers too long. It stains things. That afternoon, Willa stepped out of the barn for the first time. She walked slow, arms folded, as if the wind still might strike her. She didn't knock, just stood at the edge of his porch and waited. Elias noticed her hands first red, cracked and raw at the knuckles. The kind of hands that once had stitched quilts and carried buckets and buried things quietly. "I can sweep the barn," she said. "There's a shovel," he replied. She nodded. He handed her a small broom anyway. Didn't say why. That night, as the wind creaked through the rafters, Elias sat alone with his stew untouched. He stared at the second bowl he'd placed on the table by accident. Or maybe not. In the barn, he imagined Willa humming something beneath her breath, not because she was happy, but because quiet made her nervous. He imagined Ray curled up beside the baby arm, over her ribs like armor. He imagined the boy Jonah, he thought, staring into dark corners. And for the first time in 9 years, Elias Boone whispered aloud into the empty house voice, dry as dust. Maybe just a little longer. By the third day, the town had noticed. Elias Boone hadn't bought bread from Nolan's in months, but now he was asking for 2 loaves. He picked up extra beans, more salt than one man would use. He didn't explain, and the grocer didn't ask, just raised an eyebrow and muttered, "So you're feeding ghosts now, Boone?" Elias didn't flinch. He just laid down coin and walked out with the sack tucked beneath his arm. But whispers work faster than frost. At the saloon, someone mentioned seeing a woman, thin, dark-haired, wrapped in a tattered coat, fetching water from the pump behind Boone's barn. At the chapel steps, Miss Lorna Harper told Reverend Hatch, "There's children, I swear it. Poor little things running barefoot through the snow. Boone's gone soft in the head or sick in the soul." It didn't take long for Sheriff Delman to ride out. He came just past noon, the kind of hour where the sun hangs low, but doesn't give heat. His horse snorted as they neared the porch. Elias was on the roof, patching a seam that hadn't leaked in years. "You're getting handy again." Delman called dismounting. "Thought you'd left all that to rot." Elias didn't look down. Just hammered one last nail and climbed down slow like a man with nothing to rush for. The sheriff removed his hat. He wasn't the kind Posture had known Elias back when they both wore blue and held rifles with shaking hands. But there was distance in his voice now. Like friendship wasn't quite enough to shield what had to be said. "Word is you got squatters," he began. Elias set the hammer on the porch rail. "Word's always got something to say." 5 kids and a woman, Delman continued. "No kin, no claim. You know how this town works?" Elias nodded once. "Cruel in daylight, worse at night." Delman didn't smile. "If the council hears it official, they'll send someone from the county. Papers questions may be worse." "They hungry?" Elias asked. "What? The council?" "Are they hungry?" Elias met his eyes slow and steady. "Because I'm feeding kids who are digging for peels behind Nolan's butcher shop. That's the only crime I'm guilty of." Delman sighed. "You're not helping yourself." "I'm not trying to." Inside the barn, Willa heard hoofbeats. She paused mid-sweep, hand tightening around the broomstick. The children fell quiet without being told, instinct older than memory. When Elias returned, his boots tracked snow across the boards she'd just cleaned. He didn't apologize. "They'll come," she asked. "Maybe." "Then we'll go," she said quickly, "before they knock." Elias looked at her, really looked. The lines around her eyes were deeper today. One child, Jonah, clung to her skirt. Ray stood behind her like a shadow, learning how to be strong. "You ain't trespassing," he said. "I'm not staying where I'm not wanted." "You're here," he said plainly, "because you asked for scraps. And I gave you shelter. That's all." "That's not how they'll see it." "I don't care how they see it." She stared at him. "Why?" He didn't answer. That evening, Elias brought nails to the barn and reinforced the back wall. The storm coming would hit harder than the last. Willa stood nearby, watching him with guarded eyes. "I don't understand you." He kept hammering. "Most folks don't." "Are you doing this for someone else?" "Someone gone." Elias paused. For a second, the air between them tightened like a rope. "I'm doing it," he said, "so that child over there doesn't sleep with snowflakes on her blanket. That's all." Willa looked over at Sadie, who was curled beneath a stack of hay, her tiny hands folded like she was praying in her dreams. "You'll get run out for this," she said. Elias shrugged. "Ain't like I was invited to stay in the first place." That night, As the wind picked up and shutters clapped in the dark, Elias stood in the doorway of the barn for a long time. He didn't enter. He just watched, eyes fixed on a small oil lamp Willa had placed near the baby's bed. The flame was weak, but it held. And somehow, that was enough. She never made a sound, not when the cold crept in through the floorboards, not when the firewood ran low, not even when the wind howled like wolves circling close. The baby SOTI was always silent. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that clung to her like a shadow. Elias noticed it one evening as he brought in a tin of beans and an extra blanket. The others were stirring Ray, helping Willa boil water, Jonah sorting nails, the little ones playing with buttons and string. But SOTI just sat in her mother's lap, eyes wide, unmoving, hands clenched into tiny fists. Not crying, not smiling, just there. Like a doll someone forgot how to love. She ever make a sound? Elias asked, his voice barely above the crackle of the stove. Willa didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. Not since Tennessee. What happened there? She paused, stirred twice more. Too much. He waited, but she offered nothing else. The silence between them wasn't new, but it was heavier now. She's sick. Willa shook her head. Not in ways a doctor could name. Elias crouched near the stove, adjusting the coals. Most babies cry. It's how they say they need something. She learned not to need, Willa said. Her voice was flat. Not bitter, just worn. Later that night, Elias stood in the doorway to the barn, watching as Willa rocked SOTI under a wool shawl. The girl's head leaned against her mother's chest, eyes open, but blank, like the world had never offered her a reason to blink. She ever laugh? He asked. Willa flinched barely. Used to, before Earl. Elias didn't ask who Earl was. He already knew. The kind of man who leaves bruises you can't name. The kind who teaches a child to be small, quiet, invisible. She stopped crying after the river. Willa said, her voice catching just slightly. We were running. He was close behind. I slipped. She went under. Her hands trembled around SOTI's blanket. I thought I lost her. I reached through the dark, through the cold, and grabbed nothing but water. A pause. Then I caught the edge of her shawl, pulled her out by the fringe. She looked down at SOTI. She hasn't cried since. Elias looked at the child, breathing alive, but locked somewhere he couldn't reach. She's strong, he said quietly. She's afraid, Willa corrected. That if she cries again, no one will come. He didn't reply. Just walked back to the house, the snow crunching soft beneath his boots. Inside, he lit the lantern in the nursery for the first time in 9 years. The wallpaper had peeled. The crib still sat in the corner, dusty, untouched. He took the small, hand-carved mobile from the shelf, the one Mary had made with stars and birds, and held it in both hands. That night, he cleaned it, oiled the wood, and fixed the string. Then, without a word, he brought it to the barn and hung it above SOTI's makeshift bed. Willa watched him but didn't speak. When the baby opened her eyes and saw the mobile turning slowly light, catching the edges of the carved stars, she reached for it. Still no sound, but her fingers moved, and Elias Boone, who hadn't believed in grace in nearly a decade, felt something shift, not loud, not sudden, but sure. Like a thaw beneath the ice. Willa found him later that night alone on the porch pipe, in hand gaze fixed on the horizon where the dark met the trees. She reached for it, she said. I saw. She never does that. He didn't answer, just nodded once. Willa folded her arms, rubbed at a scar along her wrist. You didn't have to fix it. I didn't, Elias said. What do you mean? I built it once for my daughter. It broke. I just remembered how. And Willa, who hadn't wept in 3 years, didn't cry then either. But she sat beside him. And that was enough. They came 3 days later, not with guns or torches, but with paper and polite knocks. That was how trouble dressed when it came from the county-clean, boots-clipped words and legal terms that sounded like concern but felt like eviction. A man in a brown coat and wire-rimmed glasses stepped off the stagecoach in town, carrying a leather folder and a thin smile. "Mr. Boone," he said the next morning, standing on Elias's porch, "I'm from the State Office of Welfare and Land Claims." Elias didn't invite him in. "Word is," the man continued, "you're harboring minors who aren't your kin. Children without documentation, no guardianship on record, no formal arrangement." "I'm feeding children who are freezing behind a butcher's bin," Elias said flatly. The man nodded, as if that was a quaint little detail. "Intentions aside, Mr. Boone, the law requires clarity. If these children are to remain under your roof, you'll need custody papers. Otherwise, the sheriff will be forced to remove them, likely to the county orphanage outside Bridle Creek." Willa stood in the barn doorway behind him, arms folded tight. Ray was at her side, her chin lifted like a dare. Elias looked down at the paper offered to him. Blank lines, empty spaces, a place for a name, his name. "Does it have to be blood?" he asked. The man shrugged. "It has to be legal." That night, Elias saddled his horse and rode east through slush, through wind, through everything he'd once sworn to leave behind. He stopped at a chapel tucked behind the hills, its bell cracked but still standing. Inside, Reverend Hatch sat by a dying fire, wrapped in a quilt and time. "Well now," the old man said, "what ghost are you chasing this late?" "I need a witness," Elias said. "And your signature." "For what?" "Guardianship. Of a woman and 5 children." Reverend Hatch stared for a long while. "They yours?" "No." "Then why?" Elias hesitated. The fire popped. "Because when my daughter burned, I couldn't save her. But this time someone knocked and I still had a roof." The Reverend nodded slowly. "I remember the day you stopped coming to church." Elias nodded back. "I remember the day you stopped asking why." The next morning, the county man returned. Elias handed him a folded paper, newly signed, still damp with ink. The man read it. His eyebrows lifted. "You claimed legal guardianship of all 5 children." "That's right. But the mother, Willa, she's not your wife. You can't claim her." "She's not property," Elias said. "She doesn't need claiming." The man hesitated. "It still puts you in violation. A woman living on your land, without relation." Willa stepped forward then. "I'll speak," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. The man turned. "State law says the woman must confirm arrangements." "I'm not his wife," Willa said. "But I am the mother of those children. And we came here with nothing but frost in our clothes and ghosts on our backs. We asked for leftovers. He gave us land, not to own, to live. And now you want to take it back because it doesn't fit your box." The man looked uncomfortable. "No one's taking anything." "Yes, you are," she cut in. "You're trying to take safety from a child who just started laughing again." The barn door creaked behind them. Sadie stood there barefoot in the snow, holding a carved wooden bird Ray had made. She didn't cry. She just looked at the man with wide, knowing eyes. Elias stepped beside Willa. "She bears no papers." "But I gave her my name yesterday morning." The man blinked. "You what?" "I gave it to all of them," Elias said. The Reverend filed it. No fanfare, just ink and promise. "Their name's Boone now." The man adjusted his glasses. "Well, that complicates things, does it?" Elias asked, calm as winter. "Or does it settle them?" The man cleared his throat. I'll need to make a note of it in the file." "You do that," Elias said, and gently closed the door. Inside, Willa leaned against the wall, breath shallow. "You gave us your name." "I had one to spare." "You didn't have to." "No," he said, glancing toward Sadie, now curled against the stove with her sisters. "But I wanted to." And for the first time, Willa's eyes filled not with panic, not with fear, but with something else, something that looked a lot like trust. It started with a cough, soft at first like a hiccup swallowed in sleep. By morning, Sadie's skin burned, and her eyes no longer tracked the mobile above her bed. She lay motionless, cheeks flushed, breath shallow. The others circled her, like a prayer, silent and scared. Willa pressed cool cloths to her forehead. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She only whispered her name again and again, as if calling her back from someplace deep and cold. Jonah refused to leave her side. Ray fetched water from the pump, her hands raw and bleeding from the ice. Elma clutched a pine cone like it might bring comfort. Even Silas stopped pretending to be a cowboy and simply sat still, legs crossed, face solemn. Elias watched it all from the barn door. He knew this silence. He had lived inside it. "She needs a doctor," he said. "She won't come for us," Willa replied. "Dr. Fields won't ride this far, not for squatters." Elias said nothing. He turned, saddled his horse, and rode out without another word. The snow was thick again, like winter had returned for one last breath. Wind sliced through the canyon. Trees groaned beneath frost. It took him 2 hours to reach the edge of Hollow Ridge, where the old stone house still stood, half clinic, half tomb. Dr. Monroe answered the door, spectacles fogged from steam. He hadn't aged kindly. "You?" he said flatly. Elias nodded. "I need your help." "I helped you once," Monroe said, voice stiff. "And your wife died." "I know," Elias replied. "She and the child both." "I know." Monroe crossed his arms. "And now you want me to do what? Save another ghost?" "No," Elias said. "This one's still breathing." They returned by dusk, snow clinging to their coats. Monroe knelt beside Sadie, checked her eyes, her chest, her pulse. "She's holding on," he murmured, but barely. He unpacked jars, wrapped bricks for warmth, laid out bitter herbs and root shavings. No one asked questions. There wasn't time. Willa held Sadie through the night, rocking gently, as Ray hummed a lullaby, half-remembered. Elias stood outside the barn, lantern in hand, watching the sky for signs of what he didn't know. At dawn, Sadie stirred, just slightly. Her fingers twitched, her mouth opened in a dry gasp. Willa gasped. Monroe leaned closer. "She's turning," he said, not looking up. "She'll make it." Willa pressed her lips to Sadie's forehead and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, more like the end of one. Elias stepped forward and laid a fresh quilt over them both, as gentle as if he were tucking in his own daughter. He didn't say anything, but his shoulders eased just a little. Like the weight wasn't gone, but now it was shared. Later, as the others drifted into restless sleep, Willa found Elias on the porch. "She'll be all right," she said. "I know. You didn't have to go," she added. "I did." "Why?" He stared at the horizon, pale with new snow. "Because I remember what it feels like. When no one comes." She was quiet then, and now. He looked at her, really looked. "Now I come back." Willa's lips parted like she wanted to say more. But she didn't. Instead, she reached for the railing fingertips, brushing the edge of the wood. "I thought we'd always live like shadows," she whispered. "You still can," he said, "but not in my house." She turned toward him. "It's yours." Elias shook his head. "No," he said, "not anymore." In the stillness that followed, Sadie let out a sound, a breathy, soft whimper. It was almost nothing. But it was the first time she'd made a sound in weeks. Jonah stirred beside her, eyes wide. He smiled just barely. Willa covered her mouth with both hands. Her body trembled, but no tears fell. Inside the barn, the wind knocked once against the boards, then fell quiet. Outside, snow melted along the eaves, drop by drop, as winter at last began to let go. Spring didn't arrive with fanfare that year. It came quietly, just a shift in the air, the kind that made you leave the door open a little longer. Snow melted in seams along the fence rails. The creek behind the barn ran clear again. Inside the house, Ray was sewing buttons into a piece of cloth, calling it a quilt, though it was barely a square. Elma sat beneath the window, naming birds that hadn't returned yet. Silas was barefoot in the mud, grinning with every step. Jonah stacked kindling with care, each log balanced like it meant something. Willa stirred stew in the pot, humming a tune so old it didn't have words anymore. Sadie sat on her hip, warm and awake. Not crying, but no longer silent either. Elias stood on the porch with a board in his hands. He'd carved the letters slow, one by one, Mercy Ranch, Est. This winter, he nailed it to the front post where the morning light could find it. Willa joined him, wiping flour from her hands. You named it. I didn't mean to, Elias said. But I suppose things need names when they're real. She looked at the carving, then at the land beyond it. This place, it ain't magic. No, he agreed, but it's ours. A breeze caught her skirt. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then looked at him steady and unsure all at once. I don't know how to stay, she admitted. You already are, Elias said. Every time you hum, every time you turn on the stove, every time you call one of them by name. She looked down, then nodded. As she stepped back into the house, Sadie resting against her shoulder, Elias remained outside a moment longer. He watched the wind pass through the grass like it was telling old secrets. Then he smiled just barely and followed her in. And if you're still here listening to this quiet story from a quiet land, maybe there's a porch somewhere in your past that still creaks a fire, that still waits for you to come home. You're welcome to stay. We'll keep the kettle warm. Subscribe if you'd like to sit a while longer.